Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of JNUC. I am Eric Blakely. I'm on the consulting engineering team here at Jamf, and happy to see everyone so bright and chipper this morning. We are here for how to create Jamf manifests for custom configuration profiles, so hopefully that's what you're all expecting to see too. With that, I'll turn it over to our illustrious Bill Smith to take us through.
Alrighty, thank you very much. So, a little bit of a warning, Starbucks got my mobile order wrong this morning, so I'm going to be real chill up here. All right, hi everyone. Today, let's talk about making custom configuration profiles easier for others to use, as well as yourself. I'm William Smith, the Partner Program Manager here with Jamf, and today I'll be talking about how we can create Jamf manifests for creating custom configuration profiles. The Apple and Jamf communities have a long history of sharing. We create and share scripts. Sometimes those scripts might be in the form of Jamf Pro extension attributes. We create and share custom applications and tools like Nudge, Jamf Migrator, or Monkey, often to solve our own problems to start. And then we realize that they might help other administrators too. We share ideas and workflows, again, to solve our own problems, but realizing that they can help others. And who doesn't like showing off something cool that they've made? So today, let's talk about creating and sharing Jamf Pro manifests for custom configuration profiles. You might create these as templates for yourself. You might create them for a junior Jamf Pro administrator to make it easier for them to create custom configuration profiles, or you might choose to share them with the Jamf community to help less experienced administrators solve their problems. I'm going to answer a few questions. So first, what are Jamf Pro manifests? I'll talk about where we can find manifests and how we use them in Jamf Pro. Next, we'll look at the structure of a manifest and discuss something called JSON Schema. We'll look at a very basic example. It'll contain just one property to manage just one setting for an app. Then we'll go a little bit deeper and add some more properties. There's several different property types that we can make, and we'll look at them all. Once we've looked at each of the basic property formats, we'll look at zhuzhing things up a little bit and making our own manifest friendlier for the folks who we're going to actually share them with. And finally, I'll talk about a few tools that you might find useful for creating these profile manifests. Plus, I'll point you to some examples that some other administrators have already created. So let's get started. Let's understand what we're trying to accomplish first. The macOS and most applications store their settings in property lists or plists. Plists store each setting or each property as a key-value pair. The key names the application setting, and the value stores the current setting. The example I always like to use is Microsoft Auto Update. On the left is the Auto Update application. On the right is the property list or the preferences file. I'll choose the beta channel in the app, and I see a key in the plist called channel name, and its value gets set to beta. Also, if I have automatically download and install enabled, I see in the plist its key name is how to check, and its value is automatic download. Again, each of these key value pairs is called a property, and a whole bunch of properties make a property list. And for someone who's unfamiliar with property lists, you can imagine finding the correct keys and the exact values to be pretty challenging. Some items like the start daemon on app launch aren't even exposed in the GUI. Auto Update will only run if an Office application is running too, and the start daemon on app launch setting ensures Auto Update starts whenever an Office app runs. We can manage plists using configuration profiles sent from Jamf Pro. On the right, I've installed a profile for Microsoft Auto Update. If I double-click the profile, I see the same keys and values here too. Now, once the profile is installed, my auto-update preferences are not only managed, but they're dimmed. My end users cannot modify these settings anymore. If these key names and their possible values that we're trying to make easier to discover, therefore, easier to use, and therefore, easier to manage. That's where manifests come in. A manifest is nothing more than a list of items. Just like a property list is a list of properties, a manifest is kind of a list of properties too. What makes it different from a plist is that it includes potential values of each property. Values could be Boolean, true or false, on or off, yes or no. Values could be numbers like -1, 42, decimals. They can be strings or characters such as automatic download or beta. And values can even be lists or list things like options for a printer. Does it have duplex or hole punch or stapler? Now, if you think about it, there's already something built into Jamf Pro to make discovering these settings easier. I'm going to navigate to Computer Configuration Profiles, select a profile, and click Edit. I have all these settings in the middle here called payloads, and payloads are nothing more than a point-and-click way to choose some of the settings and add them to a configuration profile. But the problem with these payloads is they're limited to just what macOS can do, and still, they don't cover everything that we can manage in macOS. And there's nothing really built in for third-party applications like Microsoft Auto Update or Google or Microsoft Edge. This is where manifests come in. Jamf actually has included a handful of some manifests for third-party applications like Microsoft Auto Update. Here are those same settings I deployed to my computer, and these were generated by a manifest. Let's look at one a little bit more closely. A manifest can do things like give me a friendlier name instead of channel name, all one word, which was the name of the key in my plist. I see update channel with a space in the middle, which is a little bit more friendly. It has a tooltip feature where I can provide a quick pop-up to explain something. In this case, the tooltip is giving me the key name that I'm setting. The manifest also gives me this wonderful paragraph of information about what this setting manages. It's telling me users subscribed to the beta channel will receive an unsupported nightly build that are designed for testing. And it's giving me a blue more information hyperlink that I can click. That link will take me to Microsoft's site where I can get even more information about managing settings for auto update. And below that is where I can actually choose the setting that I'm going to be managing. Now, in web developer speak, this is called a form. It's like any other form that you filled out online, like your customer information maybe, your name, shipping address, email, phone number, for an Amazon purchase, or maybe a driver license renewal form. The configuration profile manifest we're going to make help us generate these forms. And in turn, when I click that little blue plist preview button in the upper right-hand corner, I see that when I fill out the form, it's generating the same property list that I'm going to manage with my configuration profile. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to accomplish. All right, that answers our first question. What are they? Now, let's see what they look like. Two simple things to know. Manifests are plain text files. So in other words, you can create and edit them using any application that can edit plain text files like TextEdit, BBEdit, Xcode, CodeRunner. The other thing to know is that they're written in JSON. If you're already familiar with JSON, you shouldn't have a problem creating manifests. If you're familiar with XML, especially property lists, which are also written in XML, you shouldn't have a problem picking up JSON. Here's what the JSON looks like for a very basic manifest. You could put this into a custom configuration profile in Jamf Pro, and this is going to work. Let's take this and see what it would look like. In Jamf Pro, I'm going to navigate to Computers and Configuration Profiles and click to make a new profile. I'm not going to fill out any of the details here because all I want to show you is how we just apply this manifest. From here, I'm going to locate the Application and Custom Settings payload, and I'm going to click External Applications. I'll click and add and select Custom Schema from the source list. And I'll click Add Schema, and then right-click and paste in my JSON. I'll click Save, and my new form appears at the bottom. I can manually type in beta into the form field and then click plist preview to see the settings my profile is going to manage. Again, the JSON we're creating helps us build this form, and then filling out the form creates the settings for our profile. Now let's look at that JSON again. What I'm showing you here is just a convention for displaying JSON. If I wanted to, I could write all of this as one long line of text and it would still work. But breaking it up into multiple lines like this and adding some indentation is really going to make it a lot easier to read. But JSON structure follows a few simple rules. First, its data is always expressed as name-value pairs, separated by a colon. Name-value pairs, does that sound familiar to anybody? That's what plists contain, except they use key instead of name. And they put the value on the next line after the key, but the idea is still the same. Here's an example, or here's a simple name-value pair. The name is title, and the value is Microsoft Auto Update. And here are two more. But if we look a little bit closer, we'll see that there's more than just these three. Here's the name-value pair where the value is an object. In other words, the name is still just a name, but the value on the right side of the column is actually made up of two more properties, title and type. And each of these properties has its own value. But wait, there's more. We also have a property whose value is not only an object, but it contains a nested object. And note the curly quotes are balanced, or the curly quotes and curly braces are balanced, one on each side. They're just like single quotes or double quotes in scripts. They must always balance. All right. Second, each piece of data is separated by a comma. The manifest is made up of just two items here, title and properties, and they have just one comma separating them. But don't forget about that channel name, which has a nested object. The second comma is doing the same thing as the first. It's just separating two items, but it's contained within its own curly braces. It's separating its own little subsection of data. Third, so what about those curly braces? Curly braces hold objects, which is just a fancy way of saying that the value of a property is a little bit more complex than just a simple string or Boolean or number. This manifest has two objects, title and properties, but one of its objects has a sub-object called channel name made of multiple properties. And four, we'll see them coming in a more complex example, but square brackets hold arrays. An array is just a single value that has multiple answers. Here's a list of fictional TV audio stations, radio stations in the United States. It has one property called call signs with a single value that lists three different call signs. And notice that each one of these items in the list is still separated by a comma. Those are the four rules for writing this JSON, and believe me, it's a lot easier to write them than it is to try to explain them to people. And last, Jamf manifests are written in a structure called JSON Schema. So what's the difference between JSON and JSON Schema? Maybe this will help. Think about what you learned in math class in grade school. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, but a square is a type of rectangle. So similarly, JSON Schema is just a type of JSON. And remember, our goal is to manage property list files on computers. All plists are XML, but not all XML is necessarily going to be a plist. The data that JSON Schema describes is very similar to the data that plists describe, which makes it very compatible for our needs. We've looked at a very simple manifest in the web form that it creates, and we've put it into a custom configuration profile. Now let's look at the types of properties we can add to a manifest. What I've shown you so far is the JSON to make a simple web form with a fill-in-the-blank field. So what else can we do? Let's look at the different types of properties that we can use in a manifest. We're going to have some really cool things to look at. Now first, I'm going to point you to Jamf's developer website where I have all these examples that I'm about to show you available as a single manifest that you can copy and paste into a custom configuration profile so you can see how the entire form is created. If you don't get this QR code in time, my slides are available as a handout within the JNUC portal for download. Now this manifest is for a fictitious app that I just called Disk Manager. So let's pretend that we're getting ready to manage Disk Manager. Now I'm going to show you the JSON first, then I'll show you what we're getting ready to accomplish with it. Let's look at the very beginning of the manifest where we specify the title. We can actually include some additional information here. Here's the title of my manifest, and the value is the name of the app, which is Disk Manager. I also like to include the app's domain in the title for the administrator because they need to know this whenever they're creating the configuration profile. It's not required, but we can also add a description for this manifest in case we want to add some detail. And if the property name doesn't exist as a valid JSON schema keyword, then Jamf Pro will simply ignore it. Now, we can even add something called like a property called feedback, where I can include my email address in it in case somebody wants to give me some feedback to it. And notice that we have all three of these properties separated by a comma. There's a comma after the email address in the last property because we're getting ready to add some more to this manifest in a couple of minutes. So let's see what this actually looks like. In my profile, I'll set my source to custom schema. I'll paste in the app's domain that I specified in the title. I'll paste in the manifest, and then at the bottom, here's what the results look like. The part of the form is just for information, so there's nothing really for the administrator to fill out just yet. Now, we're looking at the same thing. We're looking after that feedback line that I added with my email address, where we can start defining our properties. This is where everything else is going to go. You'll notice it has an open curly bracket. That means we're getting ready to add some more objects. In this case, each object is going to be a property, or a configurable setting that we can manage, a single configurable setting. Some are going to be simple, some are going to be pretty complex, but they all still follow the same rules of JSON. The first property I'm going to put in here is called Ask for Password Delay. Now, this is the name that would correspond to the key in the plist. Everything else is a single object which has multiple nested properties, and this is helping us set the value of the Ask for Password Delay key. It too has a title and a description, plus a few more items that describe this object. There's a property order. Today, Jamf Pro doesn't recognize this key, but I'm hoping that someday in the future it will. This just means that you could set a higher or lower priority for where that preference appears in the list. Right now, they appear in whatever order that you add them to the JSON manifest. If you want to leave that out, that's just fine. It's not going to affect anything. This key requires a numerical value, and we can specify that as an integer. Jamf Pro does basic checking, and it's not going to let you enter anything other than a number when this is set. Then we have this section here for options and enum. This is an example of where I can put all the values in a long line instead of on each line. I did that just to kind of fit everything on this slide. Now, enum means we're going to restrict the available choices to a specific list that we provide. You'll see this list gets generated as a drop-down list in just a little bit. The ask for password delay key requires an integer, and it'll accept something like 0 for 0 seconds, 5 for 5 seconds, or 900 for 15 minutes. We'll add enum titles to make that a little bit easier to read, though, a little bit more friendly to our end users. If someone wants to set the delay for 4 hours, they'll see that instead of 14,400 seconds. All right. Here's what the form looks like that JSON just created. I have my friendly title, ask for password delay with spaces, and there's a description below it that explains what it does. And instead of an empty field to fill out, I have a drop-down menu. The administrator sees a list of easy-to-read items as choices from that drop-down list. But if they choose something like 15 minutes, the plist is actually populated by the enum value, which is in seconds. This is a great example of making the interface that you're creating very user-friendly. I think it's safe to say that practically no one's going to refer to long lengths of time in seconds. All right, here's another example. This is another way to handle numbers. The disk cache size key. It requires a number, an integer, to be specific. I've defined its type has to be an integer. An integer won't accept decimals, therefore I can't use something like 3.14159. That integer, though, could be anything from 1 digit to 309 digits. Don't ask me why, I just know that field can take 309 digits. A reasonable administrator is going to want to put something reasonable in there, but what is that? I can add a keyword called default and set its value to something that I suggest, like 25,600. So that gives the administrator an idea of what it is that they're trying to put in. And here's what that form looks like. My description says to enter a cache size in bytes, and I give a recommended 25,600 bytes. Although the number defaults to 25,600, I can still change it to something like 32,000 without any problem, and my profile's plist reflects that change. But what if I need something like a list of choices for something that may not be a number? That's possible too. This time, I've set my type to string instead of a number. A string means any alphanumeric character, so that includes letters, numbers, spaces, and even symbols. But I'm specifying an enum list again, which means I'm limiting the choices available to the list that I provide. In this case, the plist needs a URL to one of 3 possible servers in the environment. Because the number of servers is limited and the URLs are pretty long and they can be mistyped, I want to make this easier on the administrator to fill out the form. I'm going to give each server a friendly name, server 1, server 2, and server 3. Here's what that form looks like. All I have to do is just pick the server by name. And my plist is set to use the URL. So I hope by now everybody's kind of getting an idea of what's possible. All right, here's something a little bit different from the first examples. It still has a title, it still has a description, and even that property order, but the type is now Boolean. Boolean just means true or false, on or off, heads or tails, yes or no. You don't have a choice other than those 2 options. Jamf Pro is going to default to true or false. Here's the form. The only thing different from the other forms with the drop-down list is that this one defaults to false. And because my type is Boolean, my only other choice is true. Likewise, in my plist, all I see is true as the value. This example is for the power-saving feature of Disk Manager, and I'm showing it to you as yet another way of making the interface you're creating user-friendly. I want you to notice three things. First, I am setting my type to integer. That means my value must be a number. And here are those numbers in my enum, 1 and 0. All right, so what the heck does that mean? Do you ever get confused looking at plist and you wonder, does 1 mean true or false? Or is it on or off? Well, that's where we can make it easy for someone. In this case, 1 is on and 0 is off. And by the way, if you haven't picked up on it, I know that because my enum titles are in the same order as my enum list below. And both enum entries must have the exact same number of items in the list. In my form, I have a drop-down list. This time, it doesn't say true or false, but rather it's defaulting to off. And my only other choice is on, which is what I want. Now, when we go look at the property list that we're managing, we see the value gets set to 1. I didn't have to experiment to figure it out. My manifest made it easy to choose. Now, this one for allowed domains seems pretty simple, but it's also going to do something pretty cool. The first thing that stands out is that our type this time is an array. So far, we've had string, we've had integer, and we've had Boolean, so array is new. If you remember that list of radio stations that I mentioned earlier, you'll recall that entire list was that entire value was just a single list. That's what an array is, just a list. And here, I'm saying the values of the items in the list must be strings. Or I could say number or Boolean or anything would work. But interesting, we also have title again, and its value is domain. So where does that come into play? We'll see that in a moment. The form for this one looks pretty simple, but it has something that the other forms haven't had, which is a button called Add Domain. Now, I never specified a button of any type, and I never specified Add Domain, so where did that come from? Remember, we're creating an array, which is a list. And what do you do when you're building a list, like a shopping list? You add items to it. Let's click the button and add a domain. I'll say apple.com is allowed. But I still have an add domain button below that. Well, let's keep going. I'll click that button and add a domain. I'll add microsoft.com. I'll click it again. I'll add google.com. And you don't see it because I didn't scroll up on this page, but I can just keep clicking add domain, add domain, add domain, and add more domains. Here's my plist with the 3 domains that are listed in an array. Now, if you think that's getting a little bit carried away, you ain't seen nothing yet. I had to shrink the text here a little bit to make it all fit on the slide. The title of this property is server list. I must be getting ready to add some more servers because I say list. So it's another array. This time, I see yet another type. We've had string, integer, Boolean, and array. Now we have object. This object has not 1, not 2, but 3 properties. And each of these properties has its own type and title. One of my favorite movies is Christmas Vacation. And as Eddie would say, Clark, it's the gift that keeps on giving the whole year. Any idea of what we're going to see when we look at the form? All right, here we go. All right, wow, I didn't see that coming. But there's a button. Let's click the button. Okay, this is a little more interesting. What we have here is a dictionary inside a list, and that's what the object type was creating. A dictionary is made up of multiple properties. And remember, a property is made up of key-value pairs. In this case, host name and its value is a property. MAC address and its value is another property. And IP address and its value is a property. All of these describe something related to a single server. And look at the bottom of the form. I have an add server button, which means I can keep going and going and going, adding more servers to my list. Let's fill out the form with some dummy data. I'll set the host name to server.example.com. I'll put in just kind of a made-up MAC address. And then I'll put in kind of a made-up IP address. Let's click Add Server and keep going. This time I'm going to call it Server 2. And again, I'm going to put in a made-up MAC address. Then just a made-up IP address. I'm going to stop here because, again, I could keep going and going and going. But let's see what the plist looks like. This is just one big property list with a key name of server list. Its value is made up of an array of servers, and each server is represented by a dictionary of 3 things describing the name, the MAC address, and the IP address. So manifest can help us build somewhat complex forms, but from what I've seen, you're rarely going to come across anything like this in the wild. But there may still be a time when you need something that is kind of complex, just like this, when you might have to do some nesting of items like I did here. All right. Building these manifests can get pretty janky real fast. That's why I created that disk manager manifest, because it should have an example of what you're going to use 95% of the time, probably 99% of the time. So use it as a template to make your own. All right, next, let's look at some bells and whistles that you can add to your manifest to help validate some information that's put into those forms and provide some even more useful information. In all of my examples so far, I've used most of the same JSON schema keywords. Keywords have very specific meanings. For example, if I want to define a list of available options, I have to assign it to the enum keyword that we've already looked at. That's what gives me that drop-down list. But here are some more keywords you're probably going to find pretty interesting. You can learn about them at the JSON Schema.org website. Now, these keywords all apply to just integers. Let's assume you're making a manifest for a software update app, and it offers the ability to set a deadline. And one of its options might be anywhere from 1 to 90 days. I can set the minimum value to 1 and the maximum value to 90, or I'm sorry, I can set to prevent creating a profile instead that might have 365 days. So this is like using the greater than or equal than or less than or equal than sign. Or I could set exclusive minimum to 0 and exclusive maximum to 91 and get the same range of 1 to 90 days. So this is like using the greater than or the equal than sign. With the multiple of keyword, I can specify a value must be a multiple of a number, like 15. Maybe I do that to throttle the number of times that an app checks a website every hour. So I said I have a minimum 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, but the form won't accept something like 10 because it's not a multiple of 15. Now, the first 2 keywords here apply to strings. Maybe I need to ensure the administrator creating the configuration profile enters the name of a computer. Now, technically, a host name can be anywhere from 1 to 63 characters, but in the Windows world, a computer name can only have a maximum length of 15, which you might want to preserve just for the sake of compatibility. Now, remember those domains that I entered a bit ago, apple.com, microsoft.com, google.com? Maybe my app limits the number of allowed domains. I could set min items to 1. After all, a list isn't a list without at least 1 item. And I could set max items to 5. So as soon as I add my 5th domain, I'd no longer see a button to keep adding more items. And the unique items keyword can make sure I don't enter something like apple.com twice. But let me warn you about a product issue. The unique items keyword is valid, it does work, but Jamf Pro won't accept it unless it's actually set to false. If you set it to false, it actually acts as if it were set to true, which is really what you want. Now, I use these three keywords in the example disk manager manifest that I shared with you earlier, so let's take a look at each one of these. Here's a property we looked at for the disk cache size earlier. It's very simple. It just needs an integer as a value typed into a field. Let's expand it a little bit and add the info text keyword. You'll see it falls under options, which we also used with the drop-down list earlier. Info text just simply means tooltip. In other words, it displays a little bit of info, it displays a little info icon that pops up some text when the cursor passes over it. And the tooltip can say pretty much anything that you want, but I really like the idea of using it to display the key name that we're managing in the property list. That's because sometimes the user-friendly name we use in the title doesn't necessarily match the key name. This is a nice way to give the administrator just a little bit more context into what they're managing. Looking at the form, you'll see the little info text I in a circle, and if we hover over that cursor, we'll see the tooltip appear. Again, it's a nice way to give just a little bit more detail without taking up any space. While we're here, do you see that text in the blue that says more information? That's a clickable hyperlink, and I can click that to make anything go to where I want to go for like maybe a vendor's additional details. Let's go back and look at the JSON that makes up that property. We're going to insert the links keyword. Links has a couple of required pieces of information. We need to specify the relation to the hyperlink we're creating. In this case, it's more information, and we need to specify the URL that it's going to go to. Notice that links begin and end with square brackets. Does anyone remember what we use square brackets for? We can use them to define lists. In this case, we can display as many hyperlinks as we would like, each with their own URL. All right, let's look at the pattern keyword next. If you're familiar with regular expressions, you'll find it useful for making sure the value supplied by the administrator is valid. In this case, I need a date, and I specify in the description, date must be in year, month, day format. I even provide a default date as an example. But just to make sure somebody doesn't enter March 22nd, 1989, I can add the pattern keyword and set it to match a regex string that'll keep the value in the right format. If they don't follow the format, they're going to get a warning like this. In the top example, the month and day are transposed. When we correct it in the bottom example to the date, it looks correct. And Jamf Pro is happy. All right, so those are most of the extra useful keywords you might want to use. Definitely check out JSONschema.org, that website, for other keywords and nifty things you can do. To wrap up, let's look at some tools that you can use that'll help you create these manifests. The first ones I'm going to show you are just a few websites. I'm going to show you Jamf's developer website once again, where I have all these examples as a single manifest. If you need to look at the format for something, this is going to give you a great place to start. The JSONschema.org website is the definitive source for learning how to create JSON schema. Keep in mind, kind of like the rectangle and the square, it's not going to tell you how to create Jamf manifests, but it'll give you the structure that you need to follow for JSON schema. And you can find a few more keywords and nifty tools there that I didn't cover. I strongly suggest that you use a plain text editor that's made for coding. Avoid using TextEdit. Or you're going to be troubleshooting double quotes that have been turned into curly quotes. You're going to be troubleshooting double dashes that have been turned into an M dash. And not to mention, you don't get this nice syntax highlighting like you would with something like BBEdit from Barebones Software. If you name your file with a .json file extension, BBEdit will understand that, and it's going to make all of your keywords and your objects and your values much easier to read. I found the JSON Schema Validator website to be handy when I'm troubleshooting problems with JSON that I've created. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job of telling me where I need to look in my JSON if it's not validating. And you're going to find plenty of other websites online that do kind of the same thing, so find the one that you really like. A few years ago, I worked with one of my coworkers, Leslie Halou, and he created the Managed App Schema Builder. It can create these manifests with most of the basic properties that I showed you. I'll be working with him again to get it updated to include the things like the links, the info text, and those patterns. It's still very useful as it is today, so I encourage you to check that one out. And finally, before you even go down the rabbit hole of building your Jamf manifest, I want to show you another project on GitHub created by Elliot Jordan a while back. I probably should have just told you this at the very beginning, and you could have just gone home after 5 minutes. He did something really neat. One of the best sources for creating configuration profiles has been the Profile Creator project. If you're not familiar with Profile Creator, it's an open source app that can generate configuration profiles for you. It has the most extensive catalog of macOS settings and third-party applications that exists. Elliot created the profile manifest mirror, which automatically generates new Jamf manifests whenever one of the Profile Creator manifests is updated or a new one is added. It just takes a few seconds to happen. So search here first if you're looking for a manifest to manage an application. And you can also use this as a way to look at dozens of examples of Jamf manifests if you get stuck making your own. It's a gold mine. All right, that's what I have for you today. As I mentioned earlier, I do have a copy of all of my slides in the handout area of the JNUC conference website. I do also have a brain date set up for tomorrow at 9 a.m. if anybody wants to come and visit with me. I think 2 folks have already signed up, so I think there's probably about 3 spots left. But look for this presentation in the download link area as well in the JNUC Resource Center. I'm happy to answer any questions right now. We have a little bit of time left, maybe about 2.5 minutes, so we'll find out if we've got anything to add.
If only we had 15, 20 more minutes. We had actually a lot of really good questions.
I always run long.
So a lot of good community comments and votes, which I love to see, but I'm going to ask the top voted question.
Ooh.
And there were a lot of good comments on this one too, but where is the best place you found plist keys and values for applications? And I know you touched on a lot of good resources, but maybe we can expand a little bit on it.
Where's the best place to use? Is that what it says?
Find plist and key values for applications.
That's another presentation of its own. First, you want to be familiar with what a plist is and what the structure is. Then you need to find out where that plist lives. And on macOS, there's a few places that you're going to find plist. In your user home folder is going to have most of them. You're going to look either in the library in user home folder. And remember, if you don't see library, you can always hold option as you go up to the Go menu and say library. Inside there is going to be a containers folder. And if you follow that through down to preferences, you're going to find a ton of plist, and you can look at that. Look for the domain that matches the app that you're using. So for example, com.apple.safari, you're going to be looking for whatever the name of the app is, usually toward the end of that plist name. There's also just library preferences. All plists that are going to be manage anything are going to either live in a library preferences folder somewhere, but they are scattered throughout the user folder as well as the top level library folder. So that's the best example I could probably give you, but I do have a Penn State Mac Admins presentation from 2014, I think, where I actually go into detail about that, and it should be pretty valid today. You'll see me kissing my rubber chicken. That's when I added the rubber chicken.
Awesome. So that actually brings us to time, but the second most rated question wasn't even a question. It was, thank you, Bill, you rock.
Awesome. Thank you much. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. I appreciate everyone coming. You can find me on Jamf Nation, Mac Admin Slack, and Mastodon at Talking Moose.